Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony. Yeah, hopefully he doesn't sound like this the whole time. I just got done eating a cheeseburger. If you don't understand the reference, go ahead and look at the comments back and forth that I had with one of the subscribers that we have on this lovely show, and you'll get the humor. Anywho, first and foremost, today we're going to talk about. Today is Sunday. What is the date? February 9th, I think? Yeah, I think. Whatever, it's February. It's Sunday. Let's go. Fantasy football, gambling. We're going to talk about that. So, I have the opinion that fantasy football is been horrible for the evaluation process of the National Football League, both from a media standpoint in how they cover athletes, from a fan standpoint in how they see the athletes, from a general manager standpoint on how they evaluate the talent coming out of college and in the free agent market, to just the overall decay of the sport. I'm watching the XFL games, and I'm hearing guys giving praise to players like the DC game. They were talking about both quarterbacks playing relatively well, which I happen to agree with, even though their statistics weren't, fantasy football-wise, high. Obviously, if they were on your fantasy football team and they put up numbers like that, you'd bench them. But that doesn't take from the fact that they were doing some really nice things on the field, helping their football team not only compete, but be in the game in the fourth quarter. And it was nice to see. You don't get that in the NFL. If an NFL quarterback put up those kinds of numbers, they would have been excoriated and removed from the league immediately. God forbid they believe in God. Man, the gamblers don't like that, and fantasy football don't like that. So they go ahead and put Tim Tebow in a category he does not belong in, saying he's nothing but a garbage quarterback. All he did was win, but he was a garbage quarterback. And the rest is history. We got people clamming for Colin Kaepernick to come back, who was a garbage quarterback, while going ahead and saying, Tebow was crap, he was garbage, he was terrible. Then what does it say about the Pittsburgh Steelers? Because they're the only team Tim Tebow didn't beat in the postseason. So I guess that whole organization is a joke, right? Anyway, as far as fantasy goes, I don't like it. I do it. I do it as a way to mingle with my buddies. I do it as a way for, to kind of, give Eric a hard time in the event that I win, which is almost never, at least against him. I was in the championship game a few years ago. That's a whole nother issue for another time. But, this year's fantasy, for example, my ESPN league made it all the way to the championship game. Okay. I mean, yeah, I do it. Doesn't mean I enjoy it. But the problem is so many people that do it, that's their evaluation process. Oh, I had a guy on my fantasy team. He sucked. Really, because they were, 24-8 with him as the starter. Oh, he's garbage. He doesn't put up numbers. Okay, that's all right. I digress. Running back position, there's another one. We're seeing the running back position become less and less valued by NFL teams and NFL owners, and fans are okay with it because they don't understand the importance of the position, because all they want are the quick touchdowns and lots of points in the fantasy numbers. So I have nothing nice to say here, but I've been vocal about it. I think it's ruining the sport. Eric, you touch on fantasy. Ask me some questions. I'll respond. The floor is yours. Take it away.
All right. So, we have Anthony's perspective on fantasy. Now, not everybody shares his perspective, which is fine. Everybody has their own opinions on fantasy, and he thinks that players just watch the game for their own guys, and rightfully so. But I always take the stance that Bears first, everything else second. But I'll watch games I normally wouldn't watch for fantasy implications. But if I'm doing that because of where I live, I do get at least on any given weekend about 5 games a week, including at least no less than 2 on Sunday, 1 on Sunday night, and then Monday night. So there's always somebody or something that I'm watching. And I just like it the way it's a different aspect that you can talk with your friends and your coworkers and your buddies about. I like it. Yeah, I do. I'm in 4 or 5 leagues. I do 2 leagues that are money leagues. So I don't go crazy out of my mind with playing fantasy. And I don't get into like hardcore leagues where it's like $500 to buy in. I just don't have that kind of money. I have a family, and that's more important. But hey, 50 to 100, yeah, 50 yes, 100 I'll consider. But typically it's usually been $50 for a league. Okay, who doesn't have $50? To maybe throw down, and you can pay whenever, depending on if you know the owner of the league, and I'm pretty lax because I do run a league, and Anthony still hasn't paid me for the last 5 years. So
whatever.
It's gonna get collected pretty soon. So the whole fantasy thing, it's just another way for us to talk on a different level and be like, oh, I drafted so and so, and your guy took a big fat wet dump this week, but hey, there's always next week, but it's just another way. And do I consider it gambling? Yeah, on a very minuscule level, I do. I just like it because it gives me something to look forward to, a little bit every week. Besides the whole doing the same thing every week. It's just different. Like I love draft night when that's held. I do both pick-up drafts and auction drafts, and it's one of those where I feel like if I do my homework and I do really well, it makes the season more enjoyable. Nothing sucks worse than paying money into a league and like starting out the first 4, 5, 6 weeks 0 and whatever. I did that one year. I started out 0 and 6. Won my next 6 games. All I had to do was win week 13, and I'd be in the playoffs. And of course, I couldn't do it. But it was a thrill. Like, okay, I'm not out of this. I'm not out of this. I'm not out of this. And then last week, okay, now you're out. So now I know. So fantasy, yes. If you're one of those fantasy type players who has to follow your guy on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, and then he does really bad, or he is running for the end zone but stops like Brian Westbrook and Miles Sanders did, and that guy cost you a fantasy championship, and you take it too far and you go on social media to bash the crap out of the guy, yeah, then maybe you should reevaluate your life. That's where I have a problem with it. I will never go on another athlete's social media and rip on him for a game. Will I be mad that he didn't do as well as I thought because the matchup was good? Yeah, but that's my own personal issue. That's not my issue. Take, for example, 2 opening days ago, the 2018 opening season. Okay, Kansas City was at Pittsburgh. For all those people who drafted Travis Kelce, because they're like, oh, he's a big-time quarterback, and Mahomes was now the quarterback, but we didn't know what Mahomes was going to do. And Kelce catches 1 pass for 6 yards. And, I know there were a ton of people complaining about Kelce because he's had good years before that. And, it came out after the game, yeah, the whole plan was for Kelce to block, get the run game going. That's all great. Now, if you knew that, would you still have sat him? No, you wouldn't, because he's your number 1 tight end. Okay, that's where people have issues. They go on fantasy, they go on social media, and they air their grievances directly to the player. You know what? I love when these players come out and be like, dude, I don't care about fantasy at all. Like, that's not my problem. And I just think it's hilarious. But then sometimes you get a guy who you get guys who are like, hey, for all my fantasy owners, blah, 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 and this is for you type of thing. That's cool, too, because they're embracing it. And I know there's a lot more fantasy being played, probably a little bit higher stakes in locker rooms as well. I know a lot of baseball athletes also play fantasy football because they get together in the clubhouse hours before a game starts, and they'll have their draft. So, it's taken on. It's a lot of people who play fantasy, multiple leagues as well. But again, if you don't take it, if you keep it all in perspective and don't take it like it's a life or death situation, the better off your life and your mentality is going to be. Because if you're living and dying by every pass and run, then you should definitely definitely reevaluate your life.
Well, I'm going to go a step.
That brings us into the whole.
I was just going to go a step further.
What's that?
I was going to go a step further.
Yeah.
If you use it as a way to evaluate the talent in the NFL, then also put yourself in that category, because I'm sorry, but matchups matter.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard of front office types doing that before. Not saying that it doesn't happen behind the scenes, but.
I mean, it's obvious that it happened. Eric, here's an example of it happening, okay? A perfect example of it happening is Winston, right? Jameis Winston should have been out of Tampa Bay years ago. Hell, he should never have been drafted. But that was a fantasy draft pick, and that was a fantasy keep him on under contract. He was on his rookie contract. They could have cut him for the pennies on the dollar a long time ago. But they didn't. And the fact that they started Ryan Fitzpatrick for as many games as they did, because he was putting up fantasy numbers, you knew what you were going to get out of that crap storm. Either go with Winston or let him go. Don't start some guy because he's helping your fans win fantasy games. So there's one classic example of an organization doing exactly that.
All right. I'm going to disagree on that aspect only because Tampa Bay and Tennessee both needed a quarterback, and Tampa Bay just happened to pick Jameis Winston. And
I don't have an issue with that.
Have been suffering ever since.
Right. What I'm saying is they both need a quarterback. I don't disagree. You're telling me that there was nobody else that they could. I'm looking at quarterbacks that didn't get drafted in that draft. Who knows what they could have been? But because they didn't look good in spandex, because their dong wasn't a certain length, because their arm wasn't spectacular. Look at how he throws in a t-shirt and shorts, right? Because he didn't look a certain part, the dude never even got looked at. And a guy like Tom Brady gets drafted in the 5th round and proves people wrong that it's not about how. That's all the combine is. It's a giant fantasy football oogling fest with grown adults salivating over young men in spandex. That's all it is. And how many people did not get invited to the combine that year that played quarterback?
Yeah, I don't know the numbers as far as not getting invited to the combine, but some guys skip the combine because maybe they played later into the season. I don't know.
All I'm saying is when you have a draft class that week, you should not be putting all of your eggs in Florida State and Oregon. Just because
that's Tampa's bad. That's on Tampa Bay then.
I agree. But they kept him. That's where I come in with the fantasy aspect. The reason I say it's a fantasy run GM is because Winston threw lots of touchdowns, threw lots of interceptions, threw for lots of yards, ran for some yards, or at least that potential was there. And they kept him on the roster, kept him in the starting lineup.
Well, they have him for a 4-year deal when he comes out of the draft. He signed a typical 4-year deal with an option for a 5th year. And I know you know this. I'm not telling you something you don't know, but right. I'm sorry, but if I have all that money invested in my number 1 pick, like I'm not just going to dump him after year 2. Unless you can find a trade partner that I consider. But I didn't see anybody beating down the door trying to get Winston from Tampa in years 2, 3, or 4.
No,
now he's going to be free agent himself. So, yeah, I expect Tampa Bay to move on.
You dump him after
they don't have anybody that they can really just plug in there. So, they're going to have to take a chance on the market when free agency opens. But with Winston, yeah, he put up fantasy numbers, but interceptions kill you too.
I know.
And in some leagues, you can do interceptions return for touchdown and even have less leagues. So why am I going to draft Jameis Winston in that matter as a fantasy player and as a fantasy owner manager and draft Jameis Winston knowing he's going to throw 30 picks? Like, I don't want that on my team.
That's because you're not a fantasy-based fantasy player. Right? How many people dropped their best quarterback because Ryan Fitzpatrick was tearing it up in Tampa Bay at the time? It happened in our league, right?
Well, yeah, it did. And Fitzpatrick came in the second half of that Bears game 2 seasons ago, when the Bears won like 48-10 or something like that, and Winston looked like absolute garbage. But we all knew that, okay? But then, Fitzpatrick goes on, plays like 6 games, and then Winston comes back. So it's more of a juggling act on Tampa's part.
Right. But here's my point. Here's my point.
Guys in fantasy will go with a hot hand as soon as they can get it and be like, all right, I got to go get them.
Here's my point, right? That's exactly right. But smart fantasy owners don't do that. They're like, I'm going to wait for the roof to cave in. I may take a few hits along the way if I play him and he's hot, but I know what he is, right? That's what true fans that do fantasy like you and I do. It's like when Garoppolo got dropped. I jumped all over that. I needed a quarterback, and I knew Garoppolo was serviceable. And that with them running the ball, he wasn't going to turn the ball over a lot. And it did me well at the end of the season. And I picked up Drew Brees the minute he got injured in week 2. And somebody dropped him. He ended up becoming my starting quarterback down the stretch. Because it's, I understand, you draft 3 quarterbacks, you can drop one. But at the same time, this guy didn't have another quarterback except, but he decided to drop him. The dude ended up only winning 2 games. I mean, it was obviously a dumb move. But my point with Winston is this. By year 3, you knew he was garbage. You start the scouting process in college to see what's coming up when his contract runs out, what's coming up next year. Maybe, just maybe, you take a look at free agency and go, who's coming down the pike? Maybe you trade Winston and a first-round pick for a quality quarterback that's waiting in the wings that nobody wants. I'm not going to say there's anybody out there that I could think of offhand that I would have done that with, but, maybe you throw a third-round pick in Jameis Winston at New Orleans and try to get Teddy Bridgewater, who we know is a better quarterback than Winston. But, again, they don't think that way. It's all, the Buccaneers organization is a joke of an organization as far as how they run things. And they have been for a long time. And I'm using that as an example. But even when they were doing the college scouting process, right, they were so close-minded on two quarterbacks, as was the ESPN, as was a lot of the owners, that you're telling me of all the quarterbacks that came out that year, though it were those 2 and nobody else. I don't even know what other quarterbacks were drafted that year, but I promise you there was somebody in that pile of quarterbacks that was better than the rest that never got looked at. Because he didn't throw for 98 touchdowns in his career or rush for 1,000 yards as a quarterback. And he didn't look good. And that's what I mean by fantasy numbers. They saw fantasy numbers in college and went, well, even if he does half of that, we're going to be great. It's just, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I digress. You and I both agree that there's a way to play fantasy. There's a way not to play fantasy. I just think it's corrupting the game. And it's getting in the brains of people and how they evaluate people. I mean, would you at least agree with that you see it slipping into ESPN, the NFL Network, and a lot of these experts, as I use bunny ears, talking about this stuff?
I think it's hurt more the casual fan than anything as far as fantasy and football, because what's the first thing you talk about on Monday morning? Oh, how'd your fantasy team do?
Yeah.
I mean, I know, because I played a work league or whatever, and it was, my fantasy team, blah blah blah, this, blah blah blah, that, hey, I played you, I kicked your butt or something. It's just one of those where, that's really what a lot of what we talk about, and yeah, it's just like, okay, hey, what do you need for Monday Night Football? Oh, I need Mark Ingram to run for 120 yards and score 2 touchdowns, or something, and so it's just one of those. It's just one of those where, it's like water cooler talk, throughout the week a little bit, and really it dies down on Tuesday, because everybody knows if it's what do you need Monday night, and then it's Wednesday comes. It's like, hey, I got the guy that I was going for, type of thing, and I can't believe this guy picked up an injured player with a torn ACL. What the heck was he doing?
Shut up, Eric.
But
shut up, Eric.
One of those things.
Shut up, Eric. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
So I will tell you this. In the first round, it was just Winston and Mariota in that 2015 NFL draft. There were no quarterbacks taken in round 2, but the next quarterback taken in round 3, it was by the New Orleans Saints. They took Garrett Grayson out of Colorado State. So it was a very, when it gets to that, it's a very weak quarterback class, because then the Rams later in the third round took Sean Mannion, and well, he's not even on the team anymore. He's in Minnesota.
So you know what you do?
And those were the first 4 quarterbacks taken. That was in the first 3 rounds.
You know what you do?
And then Bryce Petty went to the Jets in round 4, quarterback out of Baylor. But yeah, it was a bad quarterback draft class.
Then here's what you do if you're a well-run organization. You trade out of the first and the second pick. You have somebody else swoop in. You make bank in the trade, and you walk away. Oh, you didn't get your quarterback. No, and we weren't going to either. Right? I mean, just because you're drafting number 1 doesn't mean you need to take a quarterback if there isn't a big-time quarterback available.
Yeah, just ask the Cleveland Browns in 2017 when, hey, they could have had Patrick Mahomes, they could have had Deshaun Watson, they could have had Trubisky, they took Myles Garrett, okay? So, I know it's the Cleveland Browns, call them what you will, but they still passed out a quarterback that they might want more than Baker Mayfield at this point.
You know what?
That's what I'm saying.
And that is a situation.
Passed out a quarterback. They didn't get Garoppolo until later in that year for a second-round pick.
And that's an example of a poorly run organization. You need a quarterback. You have 7 big-time quarterbacks on the board, and you pass on all of them. And I'm using an arbitrary number. I don't think there was actually 7, but certainly 3. And I'm not counting Trubisky. So I get it. They're a poorly run organization, and there's a point. I want to make one other point on fantasy football before we jump to gambling, and hopefully this won't take too long with gambling. But, you said, with Mark Ingram, I need him to have 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. And if Mark Ingram had 90 yards rushing, no touchdowns, and had 3 big runs on 3rd and 3 that converted it to first down, kept the clock running, and allowed the Saints to win the game, cooler talk would be, Mark Ingram sucks. He only had 90 yards rushing. No touchdowns. What a piece of trash. Even though he did everything, especially if it was against a top-rated defense, right? 90 yards is a pretty damn good day, especially when you get the tough yardage in the tough down and distance situations, right? But the common fan would look at that as, he's trash. He only had 90 yards. Yeah, well, those are big 90 yards. And that's the issue that I have. Right? As far as gambling goes, I think it's terrible for football. I think it's destroying football. I think it's corrupted football. I think it's gotten into, and you can call me a square and you can call me a lame-o. I don't really give a flying fart because your opinion means, in that regard, your characterization of me is irrelevant because I know the truth. But the reality is, I am a little square. And I am a little old school 1950s, and I fully admit that. But we've seen what gambling's done in the NBA. We've seen what gambling's done in baseball. We've seen what gambling does in the NFL. These officials are betting on games. Please tell me how it's improved the product. Because 99% of the time, the game ends with, God dang it, the ref screwed us. 90% of the time. And the other 10% of the time, you're like, what did I just watch? That was pathetic. Right? So, every time someone loses, they can point the finger at the officiating, and some can call that sour grapes, others can call that legit, but the bottom line is, through the course of any given football game, there are more bad calls now than ever before. There is no transparency, and we already know officials gamble on games. And if you don't believe that, you're the lame-o. You're the old school, need to wake up and realize we live in 2020 and these guys are doing it. So I just think it creates more questions, more problems. We saw what happened with that Cardinal player. I told you, Eric, that he was betting on games and getting inside information from his players. You didn't believe me, then it came out that he was, right? This is another example of what I'm talking about. There is a reason they didn't want gambling in sports. And now we have it, and it's being embraced by these idiots, and it's killed the sport. I enjoyed the XFL week 1 more than I enjoyed any week of regular season football this year in the NFL. And I enjoyed week 1 of the XFL, and it's not even done yet, more than I enjoyed any of the postseason in 2019. And that's saying a lot. So, that's my 2 cents.
Well, that's funny. That's funny you say that you enjoyed XFL week 1. If you looked at any of the scores for XFL, you would have seen next to the DP defenders.
I did.
That they were. It said -9.5. And right next to that, it had the over/under. So yeah, they are promoting betting in a way there.
Yep.
And I do follow somebody on Twitter who kind of does betting for a living. I hear these guys on Chicago Talk Radio talking about bets and whatnot. I heard it a lot before the Super Bowl, because Super Bowl and March Madness are two of the biggest betting times of the year. Now that it's going to be legalized, wherever it's legalized now, it's not all 50 states yet, but especially in Vegas and Atlantic City, like those places rack in a ton of money. And hey, if you want to go blow your money, that's fine. But I'm not a big bettor outside of fantasy. In fact, I actually placed one bet during the football season, and then I wanted to place a second bet because I was so confident on what the outcome was going to be. I still would have won. I do Super Bowl squares, so I'm still technically betting there too. I've done well with that in the past. So I get into it, but I'm not like hardcore, gotta go gamble, read all the lines and whatnot. Like when I'm watching a Bears game, the line doesn't matter to me. The over/under doesn't matter to me. I just care about a Bears win, because that's ultimately what matters to me. When I'm scrolling through Twitter during the week, and the Bears are playing the Lions, and the Bears are 6-point favorites. Okay. And then you see, the Bears are 3-8 against the spread this year when they played, but they are 7-4 straight up. Like I know what it means. I don't care. Okay, so I will give you my betting example. So this year the Vikings played host to the Washington Redskins. Kirk Cousins was facing his former team. The line, I believe, was 7.5. And so I was like, one of my coworkers was going to Vegas. So I was like, hey, let's bet on that game. Let's take the Vikings to cover. And he's like, all right. He's like, I'll place the bet. I'll send it to you. I'll text it to you, whatever. And so I was watching the game, and I swear after the first quarter, I knew what the outcome was going to be. And I was like, well, I just gave my money away. And I was right. Because the Vikings were like, hey, you know what? We're going to run it down their throat. We're going to, and as soon as Case Keenum got injured, because I knew he was going to be turnover prone, going back to Minnesota, playing his former team, and Dwayne Haskins came in, I'm like, this guy's going to kind of take care of the football. They're going to play hard for him. As I'm watching the game and this is going on, that's what my line of thinking was. But I was like, well, there's a chance. And if he scores right here close to the end of the fourth quarter, instead of getting tackled, I'll win. But I'm not gonna hedge my bet on one play. Like, I'd rather have it wrapped up earlier than later. And so it was funny. I was just shaking my head. I was like, okay, well, there goes one bet. And then the second bet that I wanted to make, and nobody was betting on the game or would take my money, was the Seattle at Green Bay divisional game. I was so confident that the Packers would win by more than 4.5. And you know what? Yes, I would have won money putting money down in that game, but they only won by 5. And so if Seattle actually scores that 2-point conversion, when Russell Wilson got sacked, I'd have been out of more money if I placed a bet. So you kind of look at it and you're like, okay, well, I didn't make the bet, so that's money I didn't lose. It's money I didn't win. It's money I don't care about. But as far as the Super Bowl goes, straight up bets and bets against over under and whatnot. There's you're going to have Patrick Mahomes rushing yards. You're going to have who scores first, who's MVP, how long is the national anthem. You have all these prop bets, and the prop bets actually started back in 1985 before the '86 Super Bowl between the Bears and Patriots. And the history of that is during the season, William the Refrigerator Perry scored a touchdown in the regular season. Mm-hmm. And some guy had an idea, a genius idea. He's like, all right, will the fridge score a touchdown in the Super Bowl? And that's basically where the first prop bet, in-game prop bet came as far as betting on different things in the Super Bowl. If you guys remember back to the Broncos-Seahawks game, I worked with a guy. He was a big bettor. He would, I can't remember if he would bet on like Bet360.com or something. It was one of those websites. And he's like, hey, you remember the opening play of that game when Seattle got a safety because the ball was snapped over Peyton Manning's head? I said, yeah. He's like, yeah. He's like, me and my dad put $100 on that and won like over like $6 grand because that was the first prop, like who would score first or how would the first score happen, and they picked safety and they won a crap ton of money. So sometimes it's a shot in the dark, sometimes it's not. I don't do it a lot. I don't do it often as far as making bets or whatever. I just don't want to get into like a deep hole. I don't want to lose my money either.
Well, the thing is, Eric, we're already in a dark abyss. I look back at the Rams-Patriots Super Bowl. You won't find anyone to say that was a good Super Bowl. You won't find anyone to say it was a great defensive game between two teams that deserved to be there, right? Everyone, by and large, says it was a terrible Super Bowl. Why? Because a lot of those people that bet didn't win money. They were expecting a 57-56 score, and they didn't get it. Conversely, this Super Bowl, what has everyone said? Oh, it's a great Super Bowl. One of the best I've seen. Really? One of the best you've seen. You're going to put this in one of the best you've seen. How many Super Bowls have you watched? 5? It was entertaining. I wouldn't put it in the top 50 Super Bowls of all time. I'm sorry, I wouldn't. I wouldn't put last year's Super Bowl in the top 50 either, don't get me wrong. But they were one and the same in entertainment value depending on the type of fan that you were. But because we live in a gambling-heavy society, no one's going to give that Super Bowl credence. Now, again, would I put the Rams-Patriots Super Bowl in the top 50? No. But the criticism of it was absolutely ridiculous and uncalled for and unrealistic.
There was an article written after the Super Bowl. I think it came out Monday. Could have been Tuesday. And it was one specific article, and it really didn't devolve about the game itself. But ESPN ran the article on their site. So if you read ESPN regularly, you might have seen it. I go on there maybe once or twice, see about a story, see if there's any stories out there that maybe weren't talked about. Okay, and I'll read an article. Well, this particular article was bettors lose big with Mahomes rushing yards. So I go on the article, and if you guys remember at the end of the fourth quarter when the Chiefs were trying to run out the clock, and Mahomes went backwards a few times, and rightfully so. Okay, like he was trying to run out the clock, so this way he leaves San Francisco with the littlest time amount possible, because you never know what happens in football. But so the prop that came out of Mahomes at the earliest you could get it was Mahomes at over under 27 rushing yards. But a lot of people had their bets at Mahomes at 37 and a half over or under rushing yards. Well, Mahomes going into that drive had 40, 44, 49. Okay? And he ended up losing 15 yards. And Vegas collects all their money in, the sports books or whatnot because a lot of people put over 36 and a half or 37 and a half. And it was just fascinating article because sometimes you get these articles where you get crap college basketball team going to Duke, who's favored by 36.5, and then Duke loses outright. And, so many people lost their bet, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, guess what? I'm not one of them. You can write all these articles you want, and you can find them probably anywhere you want to. But it's just one of those where now they're writing articles about betting.
Right, and that team...
people lost or whatnot.
And that team that pulled off the great upset against Duke gets no airtime.
Oh, right, exactly. It's still about how many people took Duke, why Duke lost.
Not the kid for the other team that put up 45 points, had 3 steals, 10 assists, 12 rebounds. That's irrelevant, right? I'm not trying to crap on people that bet. You bet, you be you, okay? The problem that I have is when you, like my buddy Joe, who I don't even think realizes this, and I think he's a lot of people out there, cannot watch football without it, you're not a fan. You have a gambling problem. That's what you have. You're not a football fan. You're a gambleaholic, or what do they call it? A gambling addict. That's it. That's all it is. Because you can't get enjoyment out of a sport unless you're winning money that you bet. How's that different from somebody who can't have a good time unless they go and blow $12,000 at the casino? How's that different from the person that can't go out and have a good time unless they get a little drunk? How's that different from the guy that can't go hang out at his buddies unless they have 3 or 4 joints? Like, that's a you problem.
Yeah, it is. And gambling has been going on since, way before we were born and whatnot. I mean, the earliest known gambling that's actually widely known is the Black Sox scandal back in 1919.
Yep.
The mob, the gamblers and the mob, they wanted to make some money, and the players were like, let's get in on it. They threw the World Series, and the White Sox were heavily favored. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is as I go back, and it's a great trivia question. It's like, not everybody remembers the first loser in a championship game, but everybody remembers the 1919 Black Sox scandal, because they lost. And like when I say who won the 1919 World Series, and people are like, oh, the White Sox. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And they take a couple of minutes, like, oh, that's right, it was the Reds. I was like, yeah, it's like, again, like in 20 years, it might take me a couple of minutes to remember that the Cubs beat the Indians, or the Rams beat the Titans, or the Bears beat the Patriots, or whatever, because we're all getting old. But like we tend to remember the winners more than the losers, but that's the one instance where a lot of people remember the losers. Now, there's also been basketball point shaving scandals. One happened at Arizona State. There have been others. Yeah. There's been the NBA with Donahue fixing games. And like I said, baseball, football, you could easily do it. Penalties here, penalties there. I think hockey would be a little bit more difficult because you still got to be able to shoot the puck on net.
Yep.
But you can purposely miss and miss high or miss wide or whatever. You get your team to lose, but nobody likes that feeling though. So of losing a game.
I'll wrap up.
But I mean, I guess if you're getting paid at the end, but you really don't care. But man, that's a bad mark on you. So I mean, gambling is really not going away, and that's fine. It's your choice if you want to partake in it. I don't typically. There's some things I will. If I can find a way, but I didn't go out of my way and I didn't beat down everybody's door to be like, hey, take my money to put it on Green Bay. Listen, I'd have felt dirty had I put money on Green Bay and rooted for them to win. I mean, I picked them to win the game, okay? And I thought they'd blow out Seattle. Hey, they won by 5. The spread was 4.5. And yes, I would have won, but that would have been money. I'd have been like, damn, give me a lighter.
Here's the thing, too. This is my point. Where I get frustrated is you've got these gambling nutcases now that are running around claiming that the NFL is only being kept afloat by gambling and that the only reason it got popular was because of gambling. That is, look, you are right, Eric. Gambling has been a part of football for probably since the 1950s and beyond. I don't disagree with that 1 second. But you are not going to tell me that gambling did more for football than 1980s NFL football did for football. You are not going to tell me, considering they survived 2 strikes in the 80s, you are not going to tell me that 90s football didn't do much to get the NFL out of its doldrums and into the number 1 sport in football. Gambling was along for the ride, but it wasn't the reason. And quite honestly, right now, if you look at the NFL and all of the complaints that you have about the games, you're going to realize most of that has to do with gambling. Why is this guy throwing a flag? It doesn't make sense. Well, you can't challenge an official. You can't question an official after the game. You can't hear what the officials are saying during the game. You can't find an interview where the official explains his point of view, and the NFL is always going to go, well, this is what the NFL saw, or the official saw, and this is why he was right, even when he's clearly wrong. You will always find that, and that is a breeding ground of corruption. So I just don't think the sport's enjoyable. And yes, I did see that with the XFL, but I also saw 2 games, and I saw less flags in 2 games than I saw in 1 quarter of any football game this year combined in 2 games. So I saw guys hit guys hard and not get a 15-yard personal foul. I saw guys get tagged on the sideline and not get flagged. I saw football like it used to be. And again, I'm not stupid. There's going to be gambling in the XFL. There's an XFL fantasy football league, for crying out loud. DraftKings has it. I get it. But you're not going to sit there and tell me that Cardell Jones is the greatest quarterback in the XFL. He's played 1 game. He played well. And statistically, you can't be real happy, but I saw a pretty darn good effort. Right? And his team's 1-0, and they were picked to win big, and they won big. So that's my closing thoughts. I'll let you close us out, E. 3 minutes, go.
Well, basically to finish this off, I won't even need 3 minutes. But to close this off, whether or not you gamble, that's completely on you. I'm not gonna look down at anybody or whatnot for gambling and what they lose, what they make. That's your personal stuff. Some people do it for fun. I like to say that if I do gamble, whether that's cards, playing poker night at a friend's house, rarely betting on a sports game, playing fantasy, that's all fine and dandy. I'm not going overboard type of thing. And if you don't gamble at all, good for you. Like, you're not going to lose any money that you're not putting in there. But when you see a lot of this and you don't partake because you don't have a gambling addiction, you're better off. If you have that gambling addiction, I mean, you just gotta know your limit. You don't want to hit rock bottom, because then it is really hard to get back up.
Oh yeah, especially when you're dealing with money.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if you have one of those like side bookies or whatever. I talked to a guy I used to work with. He had a side bookie, and we were asking him, well, what happens when it goes legal? Oh, that's fine. He'll let me out. Yeah, dude, you're not getting out of that anytime soon, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But Illinois passed it. It's going to be legal here in Illinois. So I don't know exactly when that's going to actually take place, but pretty soon. I mean, pretty soon it's going to be everywhere. Hey, even if it's readily available, if you still don't partake, again, what you do is what you do. But that's where we are right now as a society, unfortunately. I just remember you could only go to Vegas, the Riverboat, or Atlantic City and place bets or something. So, but you can pretty much do it everywhere now.
I will say this: just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Right.
And I want to reiterate what you said. If somebody gambles and they bet, I'm not looking down on you. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not even saying you're a bad person. I'm not even saying you're not a real football fan. What I am saying is you can't then turn around and not acknowledge the flaws of gambling and how it does cloud the mind of many others, maybe not you, but many others. And certainly don't look down at us because we don't gamble, right? And we have a different perspective on the way we see the game being negatively affected by that bad habit. So, again, I don't look down on people that gamble. It's up to them. Guys, if you like the video, click the like button, subscribe. Keep the views coming, share the videos. I'm Anthony.
And I'm Eric.
Horns up.
Bear down. I got $50 on the Battle Hawks tonight, baby. I'm kidding.
Yeah, I don't bet. I have $1,000 on New York. I'm kidding. It's a joke. Have a good one.